Good day to you, Guyana, and welcome to another edition of Facing the Nation. I am Malika Ramsey. Thank you very much for joining us. I think this is our, if I'm getting my dates correct, I think this is going to be the final edition of Facing the Nation for the month of November. So you see how quickly the time went by. Last week I did give you a rundown of what's going to be happening with Facing the Nation from now until the rest of the year. Just to remind you again, I want to keep reminding you because I don't want you to turn on your television, not see Facing the Nation for about 2 or 3 weeks and wonder what's happening. Just a reminder, after the 16th of December 2016, Facing the Nation will be taking a break for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then we will be back on the air. I think that date would be in January, on January the 13th. So this is just to give you an idea and to prepare you for what's to come. On today's program, we recently read about the launch of, I'm going to use what some of the local newspapers and television stations would have used so you would understand exactly what we're talking about. They titled it the Black Business Chamber to be launched. Well, it was launched recently. Black meaning Afro-Guyanese Business Chamber. I have the expert who is going to tell you exactly what it is that we're calling it, why we're calling it that, and the purpose of it. It's basically the African Business Roundtable. So on today's program, the first part of our program today is designed to discuss that. We've been getting some negative sentiments from certain quarters, people who are saying, you know, if this is a country, national unity in six, well, we've learned as children 6 races, but it's actually 6 ethnicities. Why is it that we need a separate thing for black people? But we're going to be getting deep into that and telling you exactly why it is necessary, and also emphasizing that it has nothing to do with segregating or separating one race from another. But there are certain things that are realities, and certain every ethnicity in our country need representation, and this is the main purpose of this. But of course, you'll hear about that coming up in a bit with my guest on today's program. Before I introduce the guest, coming up on the second half of today's program, I expect to have he's the president of the Guyana Amateur Bodybuilding and Fitness Federation, Mr. Kevon Best. He's expected to be on the program in the second half of it. Of course, you know, I seldom focus on sport, but you know, we need to involve everything from time to time, you know, to highlight and let you know what's happening with various groups and so on in society. But now on to today's topic, which is the Black Business Chamber. It is my pleasure to welcome back to our program Mr. Eric Phillips. Of course, you know, he also heads AGDA. We are very familiar with AGDA, but today's conversation is about this chamber that was recently launched. Mr. Eric Phillips, welcome back to Facing the Nation. It's a pleasure to have you again, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right, great. Let's get right into it. We've heard the negative sentiments and the questions, and by rightful questions. Why do we need a black, or let's say Afro-Guyanese chamber? Why is it necessary?
Well, let's get the historical context right.
Okay.
There's an international decade for people of African descent that the UN said would start and end in 2024. Mm-hmm. In that resolution, there is a program of activities. And one of the key issues is that the United Nations have recognized that slavery was a crime against humanity, and that Afro descendants throughout the entire globe have been disadvantaged. They're behind everyone because they were enslaved, and they lost their lands, their culture, everything. So the decade is about obligations of all governments, including our government, to ensure that people of African descent have equal access to the nation's patrimony, whether it's land, water, education, etc. So within that context, the African Business Roundtable has been formed to partner with the government and the civil society to ensure that Guyana's obligations are met. Mm-hmm. Now, this particular area is about economics.
Okay.
The United Nations speaks about economical, political, civic, cultural rights. And so the African Business Chamber, Business Roundtable, is about that. And more so, it's a glaring need in Guyana. In Guyana, we have the Private Sector Commission. We have the Guyana Chamber of Commerce and Industry. we have the Guyana Manufacturing Services Association. And if you were to look at those organizations, and they all claim to be the private sector, we don't have any representation. The Private Sector Commission has 25 corporate members. We're not there.
As an attempt, even, and this is, viewers, this is before we come to specifically the African Business Roundtable, has an attempt been made before to become a part of the Private Sector Commission by Afro-Guyanese, but more so business persons, established business people? It's
a good question, because if you look at the Private Sector Commission, they're large companies. Africans in Guyana, together with Amerindians, are about 60% of this population. We own 5% of the economy. So we don't have those large companies. We don't own banks. We don't have airlines. We don't have businesses in most of the sectors. In order to join those institutions, you have to have a business. The Private Sector Commission, for example, has 25 corporate members. We're not any of those 25. They have 25 sectorial groupings. Mm-hmm. We're not in any of those. But yet the private sector is involved in every committee, whether it's constitutional or not, representing the private sector. So we're not represented. And we're at a big disadvantage because those large companies, some of them are vertically integrated. They own banks and many other businesses. So when we go to these institutions, we're actually competing with people who are competing with us, who we have to borrow from. So we need to establish our own business chamber so that we can address our own business needs, because they're not being addressed by any of those three groupings.
All right, good. In saying all of that, establishing own business chamber and the fact that, it's, for want of a better phrase, it's been left out of the Private Sector Commission, will there be an exchange, a crossover in terms of becoming a part of the Private Sector Commission now or working with the Private Sector Commission? How possible will that be now after this recent launch?
We will participate as the African Business Roundtable in those three other institutions. Mm-hmm. Part of the problem has been that we've been left out of information. Mm-hmm. When investors come here, they meet the Private Sector Commission, the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, and the Guyana Manufacturers and Services Association. So we don't get to meet them because we're not members. There are a lot of tours, there are a lot of delegations. We don't get access to those because we're not members. They meet with the government on the budget. We don't meet with the government on the budget because we're not formally a member. But let me say, we are very different than those three organizations. They see themselves as the private sector of Guyana, taking care of their membership needs. We see ourselves as a development partner with the government of Guyana. Because if the private sector is going to be the engine of growth, then the government and the private sector have to partner. And so we don't see ourselves just as a private sector. We see ourselves as serving the needs of the nation. Take, for example, we've signed on to Agenda 2030, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The first one is zero hunger. Now, how would you get zero hunger in Guyana? It means that every part of society has to be involved in earning income. So it means for us in the African Business Roundtable that we have to revitalize our villages. That's where our land is. There's no one right now looking at our villages, how to diversify it. Our villages are starving. There's no representation. So we have to also make sure that we have a vehicle that can advise our companies. Because our companies are small. The mom and pop on the street, the guy hustling, they don't have any membership in the private sector committees. When they go to a bank, they go there barefooted because they don't have the networks to get access to the heads of the bank. Whereas members in the private sector could call their friend who's the head of the bank because he's a member. And they can do deals at breakfast meetings, at dinner meetings, at home, where we don't have that type of access.
What stops the African Business Roundtable? This, in other words, viewers, again, I have to keep saying this so the viewers will, get it, especially for those now joining us. What stops the African Business Roundtable, quote unquote, Black Business Chamber from becoming a sense, aloof and not addressing the needs of our ordinary citizens on the ground. And viewers, I don't mean ordinary in a negative sense. I know they could be very sensitive at times. But what stops you from becoming so, in a sense, in a class of your own and forgetting the people on the ground?
That's not going to happen, because we are here to build our businesses, to create generational wealth, to help them with business plans, to help them with telling them what to grow, where the markets. We're going to have our own delegations. We're going to visit the Caribbean. We're going to find markets. We're not going to wait on the government to do that. Banking needs. We need a bank. The 6 banks in Guyana are owned by others. We're at a total disadvantage, and yet banking and finance is the key. Oil and gas are coming. If we didn't have an African Business Roundtable, we would not have been invited to all the discussions, all the meetings. Fortunately, because of Minister Trotman and Patterson and Gaskin, knowing that the ABR has existed since last June, even though we only officially launched last week, we were able to be invited to talk on local content, the oil onshore facility, a refinery, because oil and gas is about all Guyanese. Right now, the Portuguese dominate all the oil and gas business, together with the Indian companies, because they have wharfs, they have planes, they have masse food. So what is happening is that we're being totally disadvantaged because we don't have the existing infrastructure. And it's not because these people are smarter than us. In this book, which is the Guyana Reparations story, we talk about the 50 reasons why we are at the bottom of the ladder. Most of the other groups are above us because of state assets. Who's the biggest miner in Guyana? Alfonso. State assets, mining concessions. You go on and on and on, and you see that the other groups have had preferential access to land, to minerals, to TV licenses, to all sorts of things that we have never had.
Does it have anything at all, and again, sorry, does it have anything at all to do with the size of your business, cooperation, or grouping in terms of being able to access these things, all these other things that the other groups were able to access in the past?
They can access it because they're the largest companies. We can't access it because we don't have large companies and we are not members. Name me a large African business in Guyana. In the top 500 companies, name me any large African company. Also, we're totally disadvantaged in terms of our younger people. There's a magazine called Ink. 24 magazines have been printed so far, 24 editions. Every face is a face of an Indian, Portuguese, or Chinese businessman. Yet we have business people like Charles Series, who is the head of ground services, who is known internationally, who works for all the international companies. He's never been featured. Violet Smith, she's the country representative for Guyana Goldfields, the largest company in Guyana. She's never been in a magazine. I myself, I've been on Business Week International, the cover of Business Week International. I ran a $16 billion project for AT&T. I lived in 7 countries doing large deals. I've run companies larger than any Indian or Portuguese in Guyana. I've never been in a magazine. Asafa George, Brewster's, Quality. He owns a dialysis company that Jagdio tried to destroy by putting Doombe into business and giving him all the business. Why aren't our business people featured so that our youth can aspire to be entrepreneurs? So we're disadvantaged in many different ways. Ecotourism, which the government is pushing. We don't own any airlines. We don't own any travel agencies. We don't own Baganara or Arrow Point or Kaicho. I mean, you can go on. And it's not as if we're not capable. Africans have been the greatest entrepreneurs in Guyana. The village movement. Within 12 years, we spent $2.5 million US, the equivalent to $2 billion, to buy land, to create communities, to grow our own food. We were the first entrepreneurs. It's in our DNA. But because of the British government, take for example why the Portuguese are so dominant today. There are about 3,000 Portuguese in Guyana. They own 10% of the economy. After emancipation.
And how much do we as in Afro own?
They're 3,000, we're 375,000. So 3,000 owns 10%. 375,000 owns less than 5%. And it's not because of any skill. You know, they were given licenses in our villages when we couldn't get it because the crown prevented us. When we grew our crops, we were forced to sell to the Portuguese, who would then sell to the British because the British wouldn't buy directly from us. So when we did fishing, they brought in saltfish. So I'm hoping that our readers or listeners buy this book. It's going to be launched next Tuesday.
Okay.
It tells the full story. So we're at the stage now where oil is here. And we are totally left out of it because we don't have large companies, we don't have banks, we don't have wharfs. And all those wharfs are empowered by the government. It's state assets. So I saw President Jaglio's Globe Trust, as if to say blacks or Africans can't manage banks. Well, let me remind him that Gaisuco has $80 billion debt. It needs $4 to $5 billion more in capital investment. It is losing 18 to 40 cents a pound for every pound we sell. It was run by 23 Indo-Guyanese. So don't tell me about Globe Trust.
Okay, all
and
right.
if you look at all the businesses, you name them, I will show you how all the major businesses in Guyana, it's not because of skill, it's generational wealth creation based on state assets, which we've not been given access
I
to.
want you to continue on that same vein, but just for a bit, for those of you who are now joining us and wondering what's happening, we are talking about why it is necessary for there to be a black business chamber in Guyana. And of course, I am talking to the chair, the elected chair of the African Business Roundtable. Of course, this basically is to give you a history as to, and really and truly explain to you why it is necessary at this time for us to have that business chamber. Continuing on the same note, Mr. Phillips, that you started on. How has, and I know this is going to touch some people and mash some people's toes, but these are the facts and this is the reality, and we have to discuss these things so that our people will understand what has happened and where we plan to take Guyana, all ethnicities, and why we plan to take it there. How has the former administration over the last 2 decades or so contributed to Afro-Guyanese, especially business persons, not being able to get their feet or get their foot fully in the door in terms of building and doing exactly what ABR is trying to do at this time?
It was economic genocide for Africans during the last 23 years. Take Gaisuco, $6 billion a year in procurement. How much did we get? None. Look at the lands that have been given away. I know because I'm part of the state asset group. We've given the last government gave Indian communities lands that you wouldn't believe for commercial purposes when conning us about house lots. So they gave everybody house lots, but they gave away the majority of Guyana to Indians. Take, for example, Blue Wave, an Indian company, 60,000 hectares of land at 12.5 cents US an hectare for 199 years. China Paper, Pytech. I can go on and on. These are hundreds of thousands of hectares, hundreds of square miles of land to Indo-Guyanese and foreigners. And we got none of it. Now land is wealth. They've taken our money and leveraged it by borrowing huge amounts of US dollars against it to finance other things. Contracts. We got very little. BK was put into power and became an icon. E-networks, new GPC, buddies. I can go on and on as to what this last government did purposefully to strengthen their communities. You go and see what has happened to our villages, how the D&I was not, the drainage and irrigation wasn't done properly. So our farming, our lands were left to die. Look at the banks. Find out what was the percentage of loans given to African Guyanese over that period of time. So you look at all of the major ministries, Indians were put to lead them. You look at rice, you look at sugar. So what has happened over the last years is that we have been, the little we had was reduced significantly because the government gave their own constituencies all the wealth. The mining contracts, You go on and on and on.
I know you can't speak for government at this time, but what would you say to, and most times I would call them uninformed, some uninformed sections of society who would say, no, well, the same thing that the current government would have accused the previous government of doing, now they're doing, because the government is supporting a black business chamber, they're pushing their own people, because the fact is the president's a black man.
The government is not supporting a black business chamber. The government accepted our call for partnership. The government has been supporting the Private Sector Commission. The government has been supporting the Guyana Chamber of Commerce. The government has been supporting the Guyana Manufacturers Association for all these years. All we're saying is that we're here, we died for this country, 450,000 of our ancestors. We were enslaved for 200 years, we got nothing. As a matter of fact, we're going to claim reparations for land because we deserve it. 3 of the 9 indigenous groups who got land weren't here before us. They came here 100 and 200 years after us. The Wapishanas, the Makusis, and the Waiwais. So why should we die for Guyana, build all of the infrastructure, get nothing, and then others come and are given lands that they don't deserve, and then the governments empower them. The Portuguese were empowered, the Indians were empowered. We were burnt out of rice. The Indians were put into rice. This is history. I am not making anything up. This is our history. You go to Baracara right now, you'll see rice that was grown 200 years ago by our ancestors. But we were burnt out of rice. You know, you look at all the assets in Guyana, who controls it, and you will see what's going on. Look at Ogle Airport. That used to be Guy Suko's land. It's worth 92 million US. A small group of people control it as an asset base to leverage in the airline industry. And so now they can leverage at Exxon because they have an airport and they have infrastructure. But we have equal rights to Guyana's assets.
You did say earlier that because of this new formation you have been, and interestingly enough, this is happening, and which is a very good thing. This has happened when we, in a time when we found oil, when we've discovered oil. And you mentioned earlier that you have thus far been able, the group has thus far been able to sitting on these meetings when it comes to oil and gas. How can that assist ABR?
Well, ABR is about the support for African businesses to have equal access and to create generational wealth. By sitting in those meetings, we know what amount of oil has been found, we have the timing, we know there's a local content bill that is being developed. We're going to work with that to make sure that all Guyanese have equal access to what's going to happen with oil. So it's been very beneficial to us. We are now sharing that with our businesses. For example, tomorrow, we have a youth empowerment entrepreneurial conference at the Hermanston. It's the 4th of 6th. We had one in Iflok, we had one in Linden, we had one in Buxton, we have it in Georgetown, we're going to Essequibo, Cotton Tree, and then we go to New Amsterdam. So through the African Business Roundtable, working with the Guyana Reparations Committee, AGDA, and other African organizations, we're going to start sharing with our people all the information. We also need to say to them, Buxton, strategically, oil is in demand, coconut oil. So perhaps instead of growing 50 crops, you should focus on becoming a coconut plantation. Victoria.
Put all your energies into one.
And create co-ops, create partnerships with equal shares. Victoria, perhaps you should be in fishing, which is one of the things Alison Butters Grant, one of our founding members, is working on. We need to say, here are the key sectors. Land, banking and finance, we need a bank. We need youth development, and here are the different things. We need village diversification. We need to have access to concessions, TV license, radio. I mean, e-networks, that's a monopoly. That's not somebody's skill, that's just a license you've been getting. Jagyo gave his family all those radio licenses. So all of the state assets they've been getting. Transportation, ICT, all those areas, we have specific strategies and plans that we will share with our business people. And anyone could join. You don't have to own a big company. You just have to want to be an entrepreneur. We will have training sessions. We'll help you build your business plan. We'll take you to the bank. Many of our contractors don't have a bond. We will work with the banks to get a pooled bond so that when they tender, they have collateral. So all these things have been impediments to our company's growth. We can't compete because we've been disadvantaged. We don't have trucks, we don't have tractors, and yet when you go to these tenders, that's a prerequisite. You need 10 years experience. Well, Jagdeo made sure we didn't have any experience. So how are we going to compete today? So African Business Roundtable is going to look at all of the corruptions. The contract process is extremely corrupt in every ministry. It's not just GRA that's corrupt in terms of giving people kickback to bring in illegal things. Gold smuggling, we're going to talk out against that. We're losing 15,000 ounces of gold a week. That could fund UG, that could fund village revitalization, that could change all sorts of things. So we will also be writing policy. We're also going to have our own magazine. We're going to promote our own businesses. Anybody in Guyana buys from anyone. We're not saying Africans don't buy from other people. We're saying Africans, it's time for you to develop your businesses, and we are here to help, and we're going to make sure that we have equal access, and whatever help you need, we are here. Because we have a lot of business people here and in the diaspora.
I'm happy that you said that, because it's interesting that the public understands that the idea of this conversation, and of course the African Business Roundtable and having a Black Business Chamber, is not to take anything from any one of the other ethnic races, but just ensuring that this community gets what it deserves. And in saying that,
but Malika, there is a lot of hypocrisy. I saw Roshed Khan write about no to the African Business Chamber. He doesn't want Black people forming their own chamber. But he is a member of GOPIO, G-O-P-I-O, the Global Organization for People of Indian Origin. Every year, they have a massive economic conference with about 40 groups that are similar to us, all Indian, from all over the world. We have the Chinese Association in Guyana. Nobody talks about them. We have the Ministry of Indigenous People. What do you think that is? That's an institution that deals with economics, culture. So what we're doing is not unique. It's normal.
You talked about two very important things, having your own bank and mining. I know we were having a pre-discussion, viewers, and you were talking about the fact that we haven't been able to get our foot in the door in terms of mining. Are there any specific plans to ensure that you benefit from those sectors, mining and banking?
Well, we're doing an analysis of each sector to understand. There are a lot of African Guyanese with concessions, but they don't have the capital. They don't have the technology. We're going green, so we have to stop using mercury. So we need to be able to work with them. They already have a Gold and Diamond Miners Association, but there are specific other needs. Water. We're the second most endowed nation in the world in water. Suriname is, as we speak today, taking 2 million liters of water in a flex tube from Suriname to Barbados. We're the second most endowed nation in the world in water. We want to make sure that our businesses are part of that. So wherever there are natural assets that all Guyanese own, we just want to have equal access. And I see Ravidev trying to say to us, equal access doesn't mean equal results. And I agree with him, because history will show from the village movement to now that when we're left on our own and when we have equal access, we outperform everyone else. So I'm glad he's recognizing that.
Do you expect it? Have you given yourself a timeline in which to expedite some of these plans, and where the people, because I am always concerned that you have explained the purpose of this, but I am always concerned that any project, any organization, any grouping we create, I am concerned that it either seldom, never, or it takes a very long time to reach the people on the ground who really should be the immediate
Malika, the people in our organization
gainers.
are achievers. We have Charles Series, we have Asafa George, you have Violet Smith, you have myself, we have Alison Butters Grant. We know what needs to happen. We've run large organizations. I've run an organization with 38,000 people. You know, this is not brain surgery. What we need to do is to get ourselves in order. We've registered. We have documents that will tell us how we govern ourselves. We're going to go now into the regions and explain ourselves. We'll have different types of membership, platinum, gold, diamond, young entrepreneurs. We will set up our training sessions. We have a secretariat. We will have a full-time CEO with the staff. If you want,
this would provide jobs too.
Yes. And we're going to be recruiting people from UG to do research in particular areas. We're going to engage the government in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. We're going to interface with the Ministry of Agriculture on our villages. We will interface with the Ministry of Natural Resources on oil and gas and alternative energy. We will interface with the Ministry of Public Infrastructure, because if you're building a road in our community, our people in the community should get jobs. Why bring somebody from Anna Regina to do a job in Buxton? That doesn't make sense.
You did say earlier, and you keep saying it, that you basically partnered with
the government. With the government
how
for
much
the better
involved?
of Ghana.
Right. It's I don't know how much you can reveal at this point, but how much involved is the government?
The government is not involved. We are self-funded, right? We recognize that in order to pull funding to us, we have to perform. So this is funded by us, the founding members and well-wishers. We're going to move to the diaspora. We're going to have a diaspora chamber so that we can share knowledge, we can bring in investment. We're going to talk to the government about our youth. Oil is here. We need to know what's their plans for STEM. We need to understand what's the plan to get them into robotics. We need them to understand from the government how they're going to change the educational system to meet the economic needs of the country going forward. All those things we're going to be addressing, because we're a development partner. We're not a private sector interested in profit and chasing other people out of the business.
Okay.
Right now we have a serious situation where one of our oldest companies is being squeezed by the banks and by their suppliers. If you're a supplier to business, you should not be competing with them.
We have really and truly delved into a lot when it comes to the ABR. I want to talk just for a few minutes, viewers, because it's coming up on wrap-up time with our discussion. The Guyana Reparations story. During our conversation, you kept referring to it, indeed, and I know it hasn't been officially launched. Viewers, I'm proud to say I've already have my copy, and it really and truly makes for a good read. I've begun browsing. What is the intention of the Guyana Reparations story, and link it to the Black Business Chamber?
Well, we're launching this on Tuesday. We only have 1,000 copies, and the diaspora alone wants 5,000. So we're launching it. It's about us before we came here. It's about us, what we did before we came here. It's about slavery, and it's about our claim for reparations. We're claiming land as part of reparatory justice, as it has happened all over the world. Why it's important is that this book tells us why Africans are where they are today, economically, politically, culturally, socially. And a central element of this is the need for land. Land is wealth. We bought villages, and that is our inherent wealth. But we should be given equal access to Guyana's patrimony, similar to the indigenous people getting 13.8%. And with that, we will be able to create more generational wealth. Now, if you have land, you need banking. So it's a cascading environment. With land, you can create a lot of agro-processing capabilities. We can create a water-based economy. We can help to use the land to leverage other people's land so that they can get capital to invest in their own land. So the two are linked, but what we have done in the African Business Roundtable is to create a vision of a sustainable economy in the African community in concert with a broader economy. We see ourselves as playing an integral role as everyone else. We see ourselves as partnering with the government, not competing with them, not stealing their goal, not having a lot of corruption in terms of customs. We should be paying our taxes. We could create taxes if we create wealth. So our vision is holistic. It's in line with the Agenda 2030. It's in line with the green economy. So we'll be telling our villages, here are the sectors you should go because this is where the markets are. This is where you can make wealth. So the reparations story is more about reminding all Guyanese that a huge debt is owed to African Guyanese. And that the reason why we are here today, as Jagdio and Jagan said at the bottom of the ladder, It's not because of lack of entrepreneurship, because the village movement disproves that. It's because successful governments, from the British, the Dutch, and even governments in post-independent society, have disadvantaged us. The Jagdeo regime showed that. The lands, the concessions, the minerals, all given to their communities.
Is that a sentence, a statement, viewers, and I got to wrap up in a bit, but every time Mr. Phillips probe, I come with something else. Is that statement, at the bottom of the ladder statement, is that a statement that we should accept as factual, or we should work to get rid of it? Because sometimes I believe that we become comfortable with it.
But Roshan Khan is saying no to the Black Business Chamber because he wants us to remain at the bottom of the ladder. But to me, I spent some time in the White House. I've studied speeches, and I don't think we're interpreting Jagan's comment correctly. To me, people are saying he was stating a fact, that we are at the bottom of the economic ladder, which is true. But I think he was also reinforcing the Hindu caste system, that if you're black, you should be at the bottom, and that's normal.
And we've accepted it as normal.
Yes, but it's also a message to his community that other groups are superior to us. So the politicians like to play on the bottom of the ladder thing in one way, but it's also him reinforcing the ethnic superiority that Hinduism teaches.
Okay, all right. Eric Phillips, it's been a pleasure as always. I promise to read the entire book. Viewers, of course, he's not a stranger to Facing the Nation. He will be back because this is one of the projects. But it's not just a project, it's an organization. I want to follow the progress of it. And again, as I did say to Mr. Phillips, I'm always concerned how long it will take for these sort of projects, organizations to want to benefit our very hard-working, ordinary people like myself in society.
We have a conference tomorrow.
Great.
We've had 4, so we're running on the ground.
So, and viewers, I will continue to update you. Mr. Phillips, again, it has been a pleasure. It always is. Thank you very much for coming on Facing the Nation. Of course, good luck. You will continue to have my support.
Thank you very much.
All right, viewers, this is where we will take a very quick break and come back. I did promise you early on in the program that our program today is designed to deal with 2 issues. Of course, the Black Business Chamber, which we just dealt with, and secondly, we will be talking sport, which is sort of new for Malika, Ramsey and Facing the Nation. We will be talking with the president of the Guyana Amateur Bodybuilding and Fitness Federation, Mr. Kevon Best, who is already here. So Facing the Nation will take a break and be back in a few moments. Stay tuned.